the real reason Canada stayed British. When the American Revolution erupted in 1775, the future of North America seemed up for grabs. 13 colonies had rebelled against Britain, and everyone assumed the rest would follow. Yet north of the border, something unexpected happened. The people of Canada, living under the same king, the same taxes, and the same empire, did not join the revolution. Instead, they stayed loyal. The question is, why? What made Canada remain British when the rest of the continent broke away? To find the answer, we have to start before the revolution even began. In 1763, Britain had just defeated France in the Seven Years' War, taking control of Quebec and the rest of French Canada. Overnight, tens of thousands of French-speaking Catholics found themselves ruled by a Protestant English empire. It was a delicate situation. Britain had won the land, but not the loyalty of the people. At first, London tried to run Canada like any other colony, but it quickly realized that wouldn't work. The French Canadians weren't like the settlers in the 13 colonies. They had their own religion, their own laws, and their own way of life. Trying to anglicize them would have led to rebellion, so instead Britain made a bold move that shocked everyone. It decided to compromise. In 1774, the British Parliament passed the Quebec Act. It allowed French Canadians to keep their language, their Catholic faith, and even parts of their old legal system. To British officials, it was a practical way to keep peace in a newly conquered land. To American colonists, it looked like betrayal. Many saw it as proof that Britain was favoring Catholics and restricting Protestant liberty. It became one of the final sparks that helped ignite the American Revolution. When war broke out, the revolutionaries assumed Canada would join them. After all, they shared a border, a history of taxation grievances, and a common enemy. The Continental Congress even sent letters inviting Canada to join the rebellion, but the Canadians refused. They didn't see Britain as a tyrant. They saw it as protection. To the French population, Britain's policy of tolerance was far better than the uncertain promises of a rebellion led by Protestant merchants to the south. The Americans tried persuasion and then invasion. In late 1775, two armies marched north, one led by General Richard Montgomery from New York, the other by a young officer named Benedict Arnold through the Maine wilderness. Their goal was simple: capture Quebec and convince Canada to join the cause. But the invasion failed spectacularly. Montgomery was killed in a snowstorm outside Quebec City, Arnold was wounded, and the survivors were forced to retreat. Canada had resisted, and Britain's hold remained firm. That failed invasion did more than just secure Canada for the British. It planted the seed of a separate destiny. The Canadians had chosen not to rebel, and in doing so, they forged a different path. While the United States was born through revolution, Canada would be built through evolution. Still, the loyalty of early Canada wasn't driven purely by affection for the crown. Geography played a huge role. The region was sparsely populated, vast, and surrounded by wilderness. Unlike the compact coastal colonies to the south, Canada didn't have large cities or a unified merchant class. Organizing a revolution across frozen rivers and thick forests was nearly impossible. And without French-speaking unity behind them, the British garrisons in Quebec and Montreal could easily keep control. The second reason was economic. Canada's survival depended on trade with Britain. The fur trade, shipbuilding, and timber industries all relied on British markets. Cutting ties with London would have meant economic isolation. The revolutionaries might have offered freedom, but Britain offered stability. And in a harsh northern climate, stability mattered more. After the American Revolution ended, thousands of loyalists who had sided with Britain fled north. These settlers poured into Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and what would become Ontario. They built towns, farms, and governments modeled after the ones they'd lost. In a sense, they refounded Canada. Not as a French colony, not as an American state, but as a new British society in North America. The influx of loyalists transformed the region. English-speaking Canada grew rapidly, while French-speaking Quebec retained its cultural identity. Britain had two peoples under one flag, and somehow it managed to keep the peace. It did so through balance, letting each group govern itself in local matters while maintaining loyalty to the crown. It was messy, but it worked. Throughout the 19th century, Britain gave Canada more autonomy step by step. The colonies gained elected assemblies, responsible governments, and control over local affairs. But full independence came slowly, by negotiation, not rebellion. Canada learned from America's example that freedom gained through war can also bring division. The Canadians preferred to argue their way to nationhood. By 1867, Britain formally united its North American colonies into the Dominion of Canada. It was still part of the empire, but now self-governing. Canadians wrote their own constitution, elected their own leaders, and built their own identity. half British, half North American. It was independence with a safety net. The connection to Britain continued not out of fear, but by choice. Canada saw the Empire not as a master, but as a partner. The British Navy protected its trade routes, while the Crown gave a sense of continuity in a fast-changing world. The two nations' relationship had evolved from hierarchy to friendship, one built on mutual respect rather than control. The defining moment of loyalty came during the World Wars. In both conflicts, Canada fought alongside Britain not because it had to, but because it wanted to. At Vimy Ridge in 1917, Canadian soldiers fought under their own flag and earned international respect. By World War II, Canada was making its own foreign policy decisions, still aligned with Britain, but undeniably its own nation. After the wars, the connection shifted again. Britain's empire was fading, and Canada was growing into a modern state with its own global role. In 1982, Canada finally patriated its constitution, meaning it no longer needed British approval to amend its own laws. Yet even after achieving full sovereignty, Canada chose to keep the British monarch as its symbolic head of state. It was the final paradox, fully independent, yet proudly tied to its colonial past. So why did Canada stay British? Because the alternative never looked better. Britain, for all its flaws, offered Canada something the Revolution couldn't: stability, compromise, and gradual progress. Where others chose fire and rebellion, Canada chose patience. And it paid off. The real secret wasn't loyalty to Britain itself, but loyalty to the idea of peace. Canada learned early that rebellion is dramatic, but diplomacy endures. That mindset became the foundation of its national identity: cautious, balanced, and quietly independent. In the end, Canada didn't need a revolution to become free. It achieved it through persistence, cooperation, and the willingness to wait for the right moment. The British Empire may have faded, but its northern child grew into something unique. A nation that stayed loyal long enough to outgrow the need for loyalty at all. And that's the real reason Canada stayed British. Not because it couldn't break away, but because it didn't have to. It chose a slower road, a quieter revolution, and a peace that has lasted for centuries.